Hey Brainiacs, quick update. We are bringing back a feature of the show that we've not done for quite a while. Special episode, Ask a Therapist, where you can ask a therapist. We're going to have a panel of therapists, and if there's anything you want to know about a therapist's point of view, about anything at all, therapy, counseling, mental health, or just whatever, then submit that at Break Your Brain on Twitter, or send me an email, dwighthurst@gmail.com.
The Broken Brain.
It's Josh Wood, our buddy from the UK, rejoining the Broken Brain. Hey Brainiacs, it's Dwight, your host, best friend, psychotherapist, and all-around Pez dispenser enthusiast, here to talk to you today about, a lighthearted topic, the pandemic. Josh and I are going to be talking about some of the psychological effects of the ongoing still-demic or post-demic or permanent post-demic. Omicron, maybe? Some of that stuff. Neither of us are doctors. We're not talking about the virology or the medication, but we are going to be focused on the psychological effects that we're seeing in the populations that maybe we work with and just what we're hearing and experiencing, and usually a bunch of other things too. So, hello, Josh.
Hey, Dwight. Thanks for having me back.
Oh, always. You're now a frequent flyer. You get extra miles now when you're here. You can cash those in on any other episode that you appear on, just so you know. So they're of limited use, is what I'm trying to say.
Do I get like a card I can put in my wallet to sort of take to the supermarket? Just get discounts there as well.
That'd be good. I should make that a Broken Brain card and it would only be accepted at participating stores. And you know what? That's up to them. I don't tell them what to do. They can do as they like. I believe in freedom.
Local corner shop, around the corner from you, they might sign up. You must be a lovely figure in your neighborhood, pillar of the community.
Oh yeah, stopped on the street, but only by police, and only, when I have to do certain things to make that happen, like drive too fast or something. So, wow. Hey, so isn't it great that the pandemic's over? That's where we should start.
Ours was due to be over. It was mooted to be over this time next week on a Thursday.
Oh,
which
wow.
Coincidentally is our 10th anniversary of being a charity. We've got a bit of a celebration planned.
Oh,
so it's almost like our 10th birthday. Is as you say, advertises the end of COVID as we know it, which is lovely.
Improving lives for 10 years. That's got to be in your announcement somewhere, right? That phrase, I would think.
I think so. I think that'll go in a speech, one or other of the speeches, I should think. Yeah, it's an easy win, that one, an easy line.
Are you giving the speech?
Not myself, no. So we've got our chair of the board, Mike, who's a psychiatrist, has been in Nottingham for many years. And we've got I believe, the sheriff of Nottingham, as per the Robin, and not the evil sheriff who takes from the poor and raises taxes, but just a lovely female sheriff, lovely lady. Apparently, haven't met her.
Oh,
or it's either her or the mayor who's doing the speech. I can't quite remember.
I hope it's the sheriff. That's where the real power lies, if I've understood anything correctly from Robin Hood, which I know is how you guys base your town charter. No, there's got to be something. I maybe that's just me. I'm kind of a nerd, just a little, as listeners know. And I would have to be like, wow, if I was the sheriff of Nottingham, that's pretty badass. I mean, come on. But no, but that's really cool. I'm really happy for you guys. And they say, well, I don't know if they say it, but my observation has been anything that's around for several years in the nonprofit sector, right? That's pretty big.
Got to be doing something right, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not easy in this climate to kind of stay functioning, honestly. So that's a cause for celebration. But hopefully, what we want to celebrate is the difference. Hopefully, we've made to people's lives. But also, being here and functioning is a good thing too. So yeah.
It makes a bit. I'm just from knowing what you do, and we had that episode a little while ago where we profiled some of the ways you guys approach I would say vulnerable populations and try to help and support those people. And I know that you guys do an excellent job. So, you actually have a date for? I mean, you got to tell now. You have to tell for those who are in the U.S. This might be interesting to hear. I didn't know there was a date coming up for us. I feel like we've sort of just gently sloughed into a place where a lot of people are still scared, but a lot of people are just kind of like dropping the masks and kind of being like, I'm the crumb, am I right? Or whatever. But you guys have it. What does the date represent?
So the date, there was a discussed date of the 24th. I don't think it's going to happen actually now. It seems to go quiet. The date when they're officially reviewing the lockdown, sorry, not the lockdown, the last thing to go, if you like, is the isolation rules. So talking about ending the rules for kind of, you don't have to isolate if you have COVID, go about your business as you would if you had a cold or if you had the flu or what have you. So that is going to be discussed to be ended officially on the 24th of March, although it has been discussed the 24th of February. This sort of background to it is we've been shedding restrictions gradually. So the masks went a couple of weeks ago, mandatory mask wearing in supermarkets, public transport, which had, I would say, limited adherence with regard to kind of when they were last enforced. They were sort of enforced after the panic over Omicron initially, and then they've sporadic sort of adherence to those. But the last thing to go is the isolation, which seems like a really significant step. Significant being the sort of diplomatic way of stating it, given. But I suppose I would say the background to this is Prime Minister Boris Johnson is in a really tight spot at the moment, in that his American listeners may know this or they may not, but there's a lot of publicity in the UK at the moment about various parties that happened at his residence at Number 10 and various other places in government offices and things. Pictures are emerging almost daily of various parties, either him or his staff have attended. The police are now investigating after like a protracted period where they said they wouldn't. So when he said, we might review these isolation rules next week, even on the 24th, that seemed to be a pitch to parts of his party to maybe preserve his position. With my political analyst hat on, which I don't deserve to wear a hat with that title on, frankly, because I'm not a political analyst, but that's how some are viewing it.
It's a little green hat with a red feather coming out of it. I get it. Yeah.
It's the only hat we have in Nottingham,
Well, do you? These are pretty off the hook parties, then. I mean, police? Are we talking what kind of? Once again, not to get into it, but I'm not as much aware of it.
No, sure. So, these are parties that happened in 2020 when there were some level of restrictions on your
breaking restrictions. Yeah.
So for some time, these pictures have existed, a whole year, really, they've existed, and someone somewhere has sort of sat on them. And at this point, they've been released. And for a lot, there was a criminal offence to hold parties or even work events at this time. And there was lots of people, in fact, in Nottingham itself, well publicised that students had parties of, a number of people, and some were fined £10,000. And I cannot do the dollar calculation, but it's more than $10,000. And what people are saying is, well, I was fined, these people were fined for having illegal gatherings, and you've got all these people high up in the government, and the Prime Minister himself is obviously very clearly have illegal gatherings too. Are they going to get fined? So the police, after saying, we're not going to investigate retrospective crimes. I mean, if the police don't investigate retrospective crimes, they're not investigating any crimes. But
we've had occasion to test out things like that too recently, as far as the question, and we have a legal question in our nation as far as can the president actually be, and I would say president, prime minister. There's an equity there, at least is my understanding. As far as it's a different type of office with a monarchy and a democracy, right? What would you say?
Different, but I suppose in the respect that they are the leader of the country. Right. I think the Prime Minister probably has a bit more power than the President in the sense of Congress and House of Representatives and everything.
Yeah. And well, from an American school system standpoint, you got to remember where I'm coming from. No, but I'm just kidding. Just kidding. American school system. They're a big fan. So all of them. But we've had an occasion to test out the constitutional theory over here of whether or not the president can even be charged with a crime while he's a sitting president. And some people say no. But then again, a lot of people in our nation say no and yes, depending on which party's in power. I'm sure that is the same, probably pretty universally. So, so getting to the restrictive part, one of the differences is you as a nation have like the mandates. There's a legality to it, and there's a time where it's finable offense to not be following those restrictions, where we had such a different level, like it went per state and then even per business, if you will, to where like the school district in the county where I live in, they try, they just do different things, it seems like. And there's been some states in the U.S. that have actually passed laws to ban school districts from requiring masks, depending on the political party of whether or not they're the masked party or the non-masked party. It's become such a weird thing. And we've seen people, although I don't know if you're seeing the same thing, but the attitude a lot of times around Omicron is that, well, it's not as serious. And what it seems like the risk of that is that people stop being careful. And it's not serious, especially to certain populations, but because it's, I guess, not as likely to permeate the lungs. I don't have their names in front of me, but that's according to some scientists. I believe they're British scientists, if I remember, who kind of said it's not as likely to permeate the lungs. And so everyone's like, nah, all right then. So there's been a relaxing, maybe more than is scientifically or medically warranted, is what a lot of doctors feel. I don't know if you're seeing the same reaction to Omicron.
Yeah, I think the initial impression over here was perhaps it's not, you may not have as serious symptoms of Omicron, although, and that's forgetting, I suppose, the risks of long COVID. I'm not sure of the risks of long COVID relative to the other variants that we've had, but that's the big unknown, isn't it? The big unknown quantity. What's the situation going to be in sort of a year with long COVID cases? But leaving that to one side, it's less serious, but such is its infectiousness, it may still overwhelm our National Health Service.
It's more. I mean, in our state, the state of Utah that I live in, which is a fairly right-wing state, and they have gone, away far from mandates, generally speaking. But so take it for what this is worth. But they actually suspended a lot of the mandatory testing that they were doing. They were starting a test to stay for the schools, the public education, to where you had to test in order to make sure that what the levels were to have people stay in school. And I will say they tend to change those restrictions based off of how many cases and how much they'd have to close schools. It seems like they change the standards whenever the standards require a school to be closed. They try to change it to where they don't have to close them. It's a weird coincidence. But they were doing a test state, but they actually moved away from it. And talking to a couple people who work in the testing, they said that one of the real science-based reasons was because you catch it so fast. Testing as an avoidance and to reduce the spread of this new strain was not as effective. And so,
that's interesting.
Yeah, and I thought that was interesting. That was for those of us maybe a little lefties over here who are kind of like, oh, you'll just stop because they're Republicans. Then, it's nice to know, actually there's some thought. And this is the thing, as of course, we're not doctors. We're really here to talk more about the emotional, psychological impact, right? As far as that's our area of expertise. And I feel like animosity is one, certainly, of people fighting about things when realistically a lot of us just don't know what to do. Not to be oversimplistic, but are you still seeing a lot of that? People fighting about it over there, or?
There is. It's very much. I don't know if you have the term culture war in the US. I think it's the US. Yeah, it's kind of they're born. Some culture wars are born in the US. I understand.
It's an export for us, very proudly. No.
Yeah, I probably sounded so stupid to your American listeners there. I do apologize. It's probably like saying,
No,
do you know what
no,
a restaurant is or
it's
something?
yeah, no. We are pretty. I mean, people watch the news.
So I think there's the polarizing nature of any debate is, and given that this is the main thing that we've spoken about as a people for the last 2 years, means that this is just as polarized as anything I've ever seen in terms of vaccines, mask mandates, testing, anything that comes out of it. There seems to be, right, there's one view or the other, and we must make a choice. In terms of the people we work with, we ask people to kind of wear masks when we invite people into our building for groups and to our office building. And largely, it seems that people don't kind of take us up on that. We don't kind of compel people to wear masks, but we do have perhaps a more vulnerable population to COVID within the people we work with. And they made the decision that actually they're kind of willing to accept that risk. It's a tricky one, really, because masks aren't the most enjoyable thing to wear. There are a number of people who wear exemption sort of lanyards, and we've got little sunflower lanyards, which are for kind of people who are considered exempt.
People underestimate that, particularly for those who might have trauma or other sensitivity issues and things like that. I knew of a case over here. A friend of my colleague of mine was working with several people who had trauma, and they would get some grief from people in stores and things, right, during the height of things we didn't really have the exemption card around the neck, which is kind of interesting. That is that effective? Does it help people at all to feel better about not wearing it?
A number of people asked us for this was earlier on when there was when masks first came into kind of use over here and people were required to wear them. Understandably, lots of people we work with anxious about wearing them, might have to feel kind of their breathing increases in intensity. They feel like they're having a panic attack, all those sorts of things. So they asked for badges or lanyards or anything we could provide. And there isn't actually anything mandated by the government that says you can have an exemption for this reason. You can print off a bit of paper and say that I'm exempt. It tended to be people who didn't want to be challenged in shops.
Yeah.
Because there was, as much as there are people who have been shamed for wearing a mask, there have also been people who've been shamed for not wearing one. And neither situation you want, really, do you? No shaming all around. So, yeah, I think those things did help people feel a bit less challenged and more kind of assured of themselves going about the business.
Over-aggressive evangelicism of either side is a little obnoxious, you could say.
Exactly. There are some people who just can't wear them, and that's the long and the short of it. Just have to get on with it. But if someone's loudly objecting to one side or the other, avoid those people.
And that applies to a lot of subjects. It sounds like you're going through some changes similar. You're now doing more services in person. For a while, it was all Zoom, and I had that experience as well. And the transition back to people coming in person, it's been quite interesting, because even those, and I'll throw myself in here, but some of my clients who did not have any problem with Zoom and seemed to function quite well. It is different. It's different meeting in person. There's some aspects of that are more, I don't know, they're more meaningful for most people or carry weight. But I take it then you guys are having people come into the facility again, not just Zoom services. Yeah.
Yeah, we've definitely restarted our groups. So our groups, when they went on Zoom, they did the best they could, but ultimately lots of people didn't engage with Zoom. And I think we've discussed on your podcast before about people's willingness to access technology when they hadn't experienced it before, made kind of big efforts to get people involved, but some people just kind of outright didn't want to at all. It's going to take a lot more work with perhaps those people to get them online. But even the people who did kind of engage with Zoom, majority of them still want that face-to-face interaction. They've got relationships they've built over a long period of time. Our groups have been going for a good number of years, and we've got a kind of core membership who have been going for a long time. And those people like seeing each other. That's a reason for them to meet up and build relationships that they might not otherwise have done. And it's really shown, this pandemic has really shown the value of those groups, frankly. But and we are starting to get more. So our counsellor on the service has started to see a client face to face, and that's an interesting one because it's someone who's doesn't speak English, so there's an interpreter present. And she described the difficulties of having that interpreter when they were only able to WhatsApp call or Zoom, and it was very difficult. Kind of elongated the session very much so. So
that's very interesting. Yeah.
Have you found, in terms of your kind of practice, is it something you prefer to do face to face? Do you prefer Zoom, or is it horses for courses?
I prefer the in-person, actually, even more than I thought I did when I went to the Zoom only. And there are advantages. You can do it from multiple locations. I mean, I've never had a work from home type job, but there's different, and I tended to come into the office anyway during Zoom, as that turned out. But it was nice during the height of things to know that my office space hadn't had another person in it once it was over back when we thought it was transferred by touch a lot, right? Once it had been 24, 48 hours, I didn't worry about the interior of my office. It was like home, right? To where it was like, when you walk in. So there were advantages to that. I will say, though, the in-person, I didn't know that I had missed certain aspects of meeting in person quite as much as I had until we started doing it again. And I remember the first time someone came in person again, and we both sat there, and for the first few minutes, we're like, "This is weird, huh? This is kind of different. This kind of feels like we're in the same room. It's been a while since." And of course, at that point, it was been a while since anybody had been in a room with anybody, or not everyone, but many of us. And but I do find the in person does carry with it some personalism that it just isn't there in some ways with Zoom. More with some than others. And I also will say what I've done in my office, and I've done this pretty much throughout, except for, of course, when I was not doing in-office visits at all. But since I have been doing them again, my take on it has been, if people come in, I'm in a building with very low traffic, they can wear a mask or not while they're in the common areas. But when they come, I'll leave that up to them. And when they do come in, and once we're seated, I always give the option and say, you can take the mask off if you like, mostly because two reasons. One is it's easier to hear each other, and having to repeat oneself a lot in a counseling session does throw off the rhythm of processing. The other reason is oxygen flow. When you are emotional, not being able to breathe is a little bit more difficult, I guess. So I've always had that to where it's like, hey, when we're in here, you can wear it if you want, but you don't have to while we're seated and talking. And once again, there's one of the things I think is a weird effect of the pandemic is everyone has had to find some level of risk management of, what's the bigger risk, not benefiting from counseling, which can have dire consequences, or benefiting less, or having a slightly enhanced risk of exposure, Anyway, and I think we've all had to kind of balance that out and say, what's my risk of COVID versus risk of other things? That's.
And we've almost moved from the government and the state providing that level of risk management for you in saying, okay, we're mandating that you can't go out except for this, this, and this, when it was at its height and we didn't know what COVID was or how to deal with it really. And now we seem to be entering a phase where almost post-vaccination program and ongoing vaccination programs and kind of some mask wearing and hand washing and meeting outdoors. And we are moving to a point where the government is kind of stepping back and saying, I've had enough of managing your risk for you. We can't go on like this, and we're going to say you manage your own risk now, and maybe we make some recommendations, and maybe you follow them, maybe you don't. But then there's always that kind of that question as to if you're not just managing your own risk, but you are managing your risk to others. When you relax something like, sorry, to return to the earlier point, when you relax something like isolation rules, you go out and you've got COVID, you give it to 3 or 4 other people, you've given them some risk too. I suppose that's what we're grappling with, and how to manage that and not to impinge on personal freedoms. And that's why we're fighting each other so much.
Well, people take it very seriously, where it's like, you're putting my grandpa at risk, or whoever, or my spouse at risk, or me at risk as well. That type of thing can drive a lot of emotional reaction. Right as we were about to record, you mentioned something that I think our areas have in common, which is price increase or inflation, inflated costs of food. Housing, right where I live, is a big one as far as cost of housing soaring. And I think I don't know, there's various I'm also not an economist as well as not a doctor, but there's various reasons for that. But in particular, how are you seeing it hit the population you work with, and how are they reacting to it?
Well, I think we're waiting really. So in April, the way that gas and energy bills are calculated in the UK is subject to a price cap. And that price cap is pretty high at the moment, but it's due to rise by more than double. So people's energy bills can expect to more than double. So we're expecting and anticipating that, and pretty much everyone we work with is going to be in some sort of fuel poverty. It's going to see their income stay the same or go up by a very small amount, because many people are on social security, welfare benefits. That's going to go up by a very small amount, and their energy bill is going to go up by more than double, more than likely. So we are kind of preparing ourselves to sort of help in the best way we can by getting people fuel vouchers. Inevitably, the kind of schemes that are being put in place to help aren't anywhere near what's needed, but the cost of what's going up. So I think it's sort of a ticking time bomb at the moment, but 6 weeks away from and it may be that the government steps in with further measures when the crisis actually truly hits. But at the moment, it's a waiting game. So we are nervous. Small plug for the newsletter. We've written a bit about this cost of living crisis and how people can get help in Nottingham in our newsletter. It's going to be released in the next week or so.
Yeah.
So there are some things that you can do, but ultimately, I think everyone's going to be worse off, and it's really, really tricky. And thankfully, I think I say time bomb for April. Things might be getting a little bit warmer, but as winter starts to bite, the price cap could change even later and get even higher. So maybe that's just the start. Not to be a pessimist on your lovely show, Dwight, but that's where I'm at. That's where we're at.
Well, it's the concern, and a lot of people are seeing it to the point where it's influencing people's lives. And I mean, in a dramatic way, many times, as far as people making, you make decisions over living situations. You have people, because like with a housing crisis where I live, house prices have been soaring. And at first everyone gets excited if they're a homeowner. And then you realize, well, it doesn't do me any good. I can't sell it and move because, everything else costs the same or more. And people who, I know of people who've been saving for years to make a down payment on a home. And all of a sudden the down payment that they have is not sufficient, to qualify for financing. And then of course, rental is also going up in accordance with that. And that makes a really hard time for people to find a place to live, particularly one that meets their needs. And I wonder about what kind of things people are going to do. You mentioned things like obviously fuel programs, and we have those over here too. I mean, there's those programs, but they're going to be pretty heavily utilized with different options. And I don't know what's going to happen with the housing kind of benefits that might exist for those under a certain income level. That's going to get and I'm not hearing anything about those income levels being raised to accommodate the new cost, right? So, and I apologize to anybody out there if that is a motion, if that is being passed anywhere, but I have not heard about it in my area, So
Do you
it's
think,
hard.
I suppose I've got two questions, Dwight, really. Is this situation in the US that programs like this are they administered at a state level, or is it something that comes from the federal government? And then my second question is, do you think this requires such is the crisis? It sounds like it's similar to what it is over here. Globally, costs are going up, aren't they? Is this something that our respective governments need to say, right, well, this is a crisis on the same level as the COVID crisis, when we had to pay people furlough and money to kind of stay at home. Now there's a precedent for a huge spending program to ensure that people can continue to, feed themselves, heat their homes, keep a roof over their heads. Does that mean that they can do it again?
Yeah.
I suppose.
First of all, you've got, I think, largely, and, anybody feel free to react, write to me or whatever if I say anything wrong here. But most of these programs are on the state level when you're talking about housing, heating programs, things like that. So you do see that on the state level. They do have things like the healthcare under the poverty line or whatever the appointed line is for what we call Medicare, Medicaid, which is the federally funded kind of thing. Although there's a state aspect to that approval as well that's there. It's just a very complicated system. So you see a lot of that administered by state. However, on the federal level, they've done some things like give everybody a bunch of money. And I say a bunch, not individually a bunch necessarily. The amounts that were awarded were helpful for many people, but the two times that they gave them out, well, I shouldn't say two. There were some child tax credits for those with children, but typically speaking, they were less than a month's rent in most areas. So I think it's better than nothing, but it's almost like, a temporary stay for some things. And of course, there's the economic implications of what does that mean? And also their taxable income in many cases. And so, you have that, and I don't know if they're going to do that again. The other things, the federal government halted payments or they halted the interest growth, I should say, and the necessity for payments on student loans. That was another thing that they'd put. And certain areas forbade eviction for a while. Things like that have been there. Then you have programs that are being offered by actual creditors who are saying like, hey, because of COVID, you can apply for this and have a few months off. But of course, then that moves to the end of the loan. There's no question of companies losing that income other than short term, in my opinion. And I will say, you hear stories about them coming back now that the pressure's off, and some of them changing the story and saying like, hey, yeah, we said, but, we're going to hit you with some problem, And now, if that's too predatory, there are, it's not that the government can't do anything if someone's being super predatory. I have heard some stories of the Veterans Authority stepping to help people who have maybe a loan under the Veterans Authority program, military veterans, and protecting them from some predatory practices. But anyway, it's like usually you have to fight that on your own with a lawyer or something. So, there's a lot that's problematic about it, and that's very, very difficult to say. During the crisis, there seemed to be a lot of people banding together, and people felt some confidence in that. And I still see that in individuals. At the same time, they're also waiting to see how they're going to be screwed over next. So there's not a lot of trust there necessarily. Yeah. So
and I just think it's sad that at a time of crisis, many governments around the world reached out in an unprecedented way to help. And even if that help didn't cover everything, it was still unprecedented in its kind of scale and
absolutely
its cost.
Yeah.
But if I just wonder, can we rule that approach out? Was that a one-time thing? Was that approach never going to happen again? Because it seems like we're not immune to crises. and this was a medical, virus related one. And maybe there seems to be a cost of living one, which is maybe not as large, but very, very large on so many different fronts: housing.
Well, it
food.
doesn't help. It doesn't help anyone to have more people on the street or to have more people who are unhealthy, or not able to get access to health care. I always tend to look at there's the cost and the fear, which is very, very real. And the hope that I say we can invest in is that people try to come up with ways to address the need. And of course, the scary part is how long does that take and what has to, how many people have to suffer or even die before that happens. But what you hope for is someone saying, hey, I got an idea. And like you said, unprecedented. And I don't mean to minimize that, because in our nation, it was even bipartisan, which is also not common, in anything, to the point where one party will propose something while they're in power. The others will say that's terrible, and then propose the same thing next time they're in power. And of course, it's terrible on the other side. And I mean, we have a lot of the partisanship is a huge problem, but a fairly bipartisan approach to say, we're just going to give people money. Boom. And it happened quickly. And that's, not to minimize how important that is and how unprecedented. Yeah. I don't know. I guess the fact that it happened means it could happen, if that makes sense. Just by the nature of something happening means it could happen again.
That's true. That gives me some hope. Can I ask you, Dwight, in terms of cost of living crises and people struggling with their finances, as an example, how difficult is it for you as a counsellor to work through someone's issues, and then in the midst of that they perhaps lose their job, or they're struggling to afford their heat or their rent, those sorts of issues which you as a counsellor may not have a huge impact on a practical level. I just wondered, how difficult is that to resolve?
Well, I think you have a couple of aspects to it that are really important. That's a really good question, because the first thing it impacts is access to care, right? If I lose my money and I can't pay for anything, I can't pay for counseling often. And I've also maybe lost my health insurance, if that's there. And many health insurances have a high requirement for how much you have to pay anyway. So access to care is immediately impacted there. That's the major factor in whether or not medical interventions help. And that sounds really silly, but when they researched it, access to care, or whether or not you actually go to therapy, is the number one curative factor. Once again, sounds a little funny because of course it's not effective if you don't go, but access is a real big problem. And then you hit something really on the head, which is counseling and emotional supports and therapy. They don't directly impact the practicality of things. Now, I'd say, there's an indirect impact that it can have, which is if I'm managing myself emotionally better, if I'm feeling more stable on an emotional level, I'm more likely to, say, investigate if there are programs that can help, or to hit it head on. And, if I am overwhelmed, I'm more likely to sit in my apartment until someone comes and evicts me, right? And not do anything about it. Whereas if I'm feeling more stable, I might go and try to negotiate with the landlord or the bank with the mortgage or whatever, and engage in those discussions, even if they're embarrassing, even if they're demoralizing, even if they're scary. And so, there is the indirect help that can give. And part of it is also just the day-to-day coping with trauma. And it's an interesting approach, or an interesting dynamic, I guess is a better word. Usually when we do therapy around trauma, we're often talking about past trauma. We don't go and do a lot of therapy on the battlefield with soldiers while they're being shot at, right? But in this case, there's a lot of almost like live or in vivo trauma of like, I'm being traumatized by my situation now and coming in. And that's not unheard of in counseling. You have a lot of people who have that, I guess, but it is interesting to see. Basically, you're working from a standpoint of coping, trying to keep hope alive, trying to keep one's head on straight enough to try to find what they can try those type of things are pretty key in what I'm seeing. Are pretty necessary.
So you're sort of giving people a toolkit, a resilience toolkit to, if they're having financial struggles, as much as they might be feeling lower and kind of more hopeless because of that, you're hopefully giving them tools to try and react positively and improve the situation, which, yeah, I get that.
Yeah, that's a big thing. And in the kind of ultimate example of mental health gone awry would be self-harm or suicide, right? And these kinds of things can lead to that for sure. And if people are alive, they're definitely going to do better. I mean, and so that's a big part of it too. As you see an increased need, my biggest concern with it is the lack of access for people who are maybe at the highest amount of need. Is what you worry about. And I think you have people under a certain income level who have publicly subsidized healthcare that can go to community healthcare, community agencies. And then you've got people who can just afford to pay. I think the ones that are hit the most are the middle to lower middle class socioeconomic that's like, I can't afford to do it. I can't afford to pay for therapy or other healthcare costs. I just don't have it. Can't walk in and do it, And it's not that there aren't programs. And most people I know, in my case, I'm just a little private practice guy, but most people I know that are in my type of situation will pick up a couple of people, even pro bono. And so I think that that does exist. At the same time, will people ask for it? And it's definitely, as you put it, it's not enough, right? It's like, we can do this. If I can take, even if I can take a couple people per week on, I'm also, on the other hand, having the same cost of living increases too, right? Sort of thing. And so, yeah, so that's one of the trickiest things, to try to give people access to have that care. And now with yours, you guys are probably running into a similar thing. Do you find, and I don't know the rules over there. Nonprofits are pretty public here, but so I'm not going to dig into your, but speaking as you're the business manager, do you see an impact in how much people are willing or able to volunteer or donate with the cost of inflation?
We actually, I think conversely, we're raising more money than ever. I think that's perhaps, I couldn't attribute it to how much things cost at the moment, but the fact that we're publicising ourselves more and the work we do. So it's probably a difficult one to answer. Anyone can have a look at our accounts, Charity Commission, if they would like to.
I figured. It's probably, a lot of places, I have to do that with nonprofit too. But as it's pretty good. But that's wonderful. I think you're seeing, in some ways, more involvement.
I think there was when we were particularly businesses really struggling coming out of lockdown, after having, hospitality sector, as we all know, suffering hugely, and many other businesses too, not getting the same business. We were sort of anxious to also kind of advertise ourselves as a potential charity partner to them, for fear of almost putting too much on them and saying, how on earth could you afford to be a charity partner as well? But actually, we found that we've been approached by perhaps some businesses that have done well. So there's a local estate agency in Nottingham, Holden Copley, who are partnered with us this year. So Breeze Corporate Finance, who I believe run kind of wealth management for various clients in the UK. And I think these are perhaps places that have done quite well despite lockdown. But I think there is a lot of appetite actually to support local charities who there's been a lot of publicity that many have gone to the wall in the UK. There was some kind of very limited time emergency funding for charities that came to an end, and at the point that came to an end, everyone, or not everyone, many charities found it really difficult to continue. So I think the business sector, for my money, has really stepped up, and on the basis of that, especially given that we're a mental health charity and there's a number of people who may not have had mental health problems before, but may have them following the 2 years we've had.
That's a good point. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. As far as more empathy is created by more, through suffering comes empathy.
I think, exactly what you say. The partners who've come to us post lockdown have all referenced mental health crises and how, maybe that they've acknowledged that their mental health has suffered from being stuck indoors, and maybe we do deal with people at the very complex end of the mental health spectrum, but that they understand that it is a spectrum and that we work with, people from all backgrounds in terms of their mental health. So I don't have a satisfactory answer in terms of whether businesses are giving more or less to charity.
I don't know. I was pretty satisfied with it. So in the eye of the beholder, make sure to call in to Improving Lives to let Josh know if you were satisfied with that answer. But I actually think that highlights the hope that I hold, which is people getting clever and people getting motivated and trying to overcome some of the obstacles. Actually, so it's happening, right? And that's a huge thing. It's good to know. It's good to know that you're seeing that. The other aspect is that, of course, mental health has a huge economic impact, because if someone is super depressed, they're going to lose their job or they can't come in as much. And sometimes, in some ways, more flexible scheduling becomes almost a thing under disability rights, because mental health disorders, once diagnosed, is covered under the American with Disabilities Act. And I've known many people who the human resources of their company has to find a way to accommodate somewhat things like that. And so they can't even fire or replace someone necessarily. And so, and you hate to think that it's economically driven, but a company's conscience is its pocketbook, oftentimes, for good or for bad, right? Hopefully they see that.
Yeah, I think we have a similar term, reasonable adjustments, for when people have a disability or a mental health disorder, reasonable adjustments to make that.
And that's in the legal language too, is a reasonable accommodation, we call it a lot of times. And you have to make that. And so, that's something that really does affect it, as well as people who are stressed economically or emotionally or both and are not going to school, because then hiring requirements edit out and filter out more people, and then you can't hire, right? So I think that as we see some of those things and people take it seriously, especially if empathy, it's a really good point that you made, if empathy increases or shared experience increases, there's a good chance, it's possible. It's possible that people may get clever and try to invest in health, which is investing in proactive and preventative healthcare is enormous, I think, as far as societal benefit.
And I think, and this is not to make a generalization, I would say there's certain, among the younger population, there is sometimes a greater awareness of mental health because they've grown up with TV programs, online videos which address mental health issues. And I think that as those people start to come into the workplace, particularly bigger corporations, they're kind of demanding, I want to see that my workplace supports local mental health charities, supports mental health initiatives. It's really, it's important for me. It's important for me to be satisfied at work.
Oh, and a lot more around here are willing to quit more jobs if they aren't satisfied with that. And in some ways, the pandemic, I think, has amplified that. If people have figured out a way to live without work or with a different type of work, sometimes they're not as willing to stay at a place if they feel they're mistreated. And that's especially true. There's some pros and cons to it, but for the younger and up and coming generation, a lot of them aren't willing to put up with a lot, as far as that goes. And once again, there's a downside. Young people are always idealistic. We forget that that's always true. We pretend, once we get old enough, that our generation had it nailed down and this next one sucks. But that's just a symptom of generational symptom. And then you got us Generation Xers over here, who our value was never caring about anything. That was the values that we had of our generation growing up. No, but being cynical, right? Cynicism. But you see this more interest in mental health, more interest in equality, more. I mean, I know a lot of young people that wouldn't work at a place if they feel like it's discriminatory, even not against them, right? A group that they don't belong to. So, so you see that, and there's definitely some real good sides to that. I believe. Yeah. Huh.
I think I feel like we're sort of writing a corporate marketing strategy for us to advertise ourselves to potential partners here, Dwight. So you're very welcome to, pop on a flight, come and get a big flip chart, bit of paper, and we can sort of map this out. That's all right. We'll give you a fee.
This will work. Yeah, we should. Well, we're going to partner. There's a new consulting agency being born right here. It's Josh and Dwight, consulting for this. This will be good. That should be good. Well, speaking of awareness, tell everybody where they find out about improving lives and how they can get involved. Obviously, we encourage people to get involved on a local level. And really, what is our local level for all of us, if not Nottingham, England? So tell people how they find out and support or get involved with your stuff.
I certainly will. Thank you, Dwight. So if you put into Google "improving lives Nots," you will find us right at the top. I would certainly hope so, or at least very near the top. And we you can have a look through our website. The very small thing you can do is just sign up to our newsletter at the bottom, which I've already plugged in this very podcast, which is going to be great. To find out a bit more about us, you can head on to our support us page, and you can find various small ways you can support us. Yeah. Even if it's a small donation, or just support if you're in the UK, just whilst you're doing your shopping, and it's at no cost to you. Places like Amazon and easy fundraising, where you can just not add anything to your shop, but a few pence goes to us, whatever you buy. So we just want to.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great type of program too, especially if you're buying things on Amazon anyway, which let's face it, pretty much everybody is. That's an interesting program where you can do it under or connected to a charity. I mean, I know a lot of podcasters that do that as well, things like that to help support their art and things too. So that's clever. Good for you.
Hey, and I should also mention, just today we have launched our counselling service, which is a kind of paid-for service, and you get a BACP registered counsellor if you're needing support at the moment, and part of your fee will go towards supporting people with complex mental health needs. So that's our newest iteration of support.
Is that local mainly, or do they do online as well?
We do online. We're anticipating it's mainly going to be local people that's targeting it at, but there's no reason why we couldn't do remote counselling, although we have discussed the foibles of Zoom and phone counselling just today. So perhaps this very podcast people may prefer face-to-face.
That's true. So I theoretically I could sign up.
I suppose you could, Dwight. I think you'd be counselling each other, wouldn't you, really?
Well,
how do you feel about that? But how do you
feel about it? No. I asked first. Yeah, it's a competition for who's going to say it first. How do you feel about? Oh, dang it! So, well, and I will say too, if people get involved, if they're involved with things in their local area, or if they aren't able to contribute financially, one of the things people don't think about is get involved on social media and find charities that are improving lives or like unto it, and get on there. And you can always retweet, you can always share, you can post things, you can tell people to sign up for newsletters and things like that help. And if you don't have the money to help with money, then you can do something like that and raise that awareness.
It's doing my job for me, Dwight. Thank you. We have a really active Instagram page, Facebook, Improving Lives Nots. Search us. Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. Well, you guys do a great job. And I will say too, if anybody out there would like to get connected to me and the Broken Brain, definitely go to @BreakABrain on Twitter. Looking at starting an Instagram, but that's my main thing right now is just the @BreakABrain. You can also reach me, dwighthurst@gmail.com. If you have feedback and you'd like to get involved, or you'd like to make suggestions for the program, As I said, I'm having it up at the top, if I remember to do it, at the top of this, the little announcement that we're bringing back something we haven't done for a long time, which is putting together a panel of people for an Ask a Therapist episode. And so if people have questions that they would say about therapy or that they would pose to a bunch of therapists, then go ahead and submit something and questions for that at one of those two places I mentioned. And thank you, everybody out there, for listening. Love y'all. And especially, I'll say a special shout out to our listeners in the UK who are, local to Josh there. Glad that you're all there as well. All right, we'll be back again soon. And mostly, thank you, Josh.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
Thank you for listening to the Court and Parts Podcast Network. To listen to more Court and Parts shows, visit courtandarts.com.